Thank you so much, Jane, and I'm thrilled to be back here at Riggs. And I want to welcome you all to what I hope will be a very stimulating seminar. Let's start out with an apparent parallel and paradox. Let's go back to Vienna. Can you all hear me? Okay. Let's go back to Vienna in the 1880s and 90s, and let's imagine Sigmund Freud quietly revolutionizing the field of mental health by means of his clinical work with the neurophysiologist Joseph Breuer. And in due course, the Studies on Hysteria is published in 1895. Simultaneously, over in London, in the 1880s and 90s, the young Constance Garnett, not yet out of her 20s, is starting work on her groundbreaking translations into English of the literary oeuvre of the great Russian writers Turgenev, Gogol, Chekhov, and Dostoevsky, whose The Possessed came out in England in 1913, just as Franz Kafka, whom I'm going to mention in a few moments, in Prague, was conceiving his metamorphosis. Time passes. Constance Garnett proceeds with her work of translation, and the Russian literary masterpieces flourish and spread. They gain a wider audience. They grow in significance and prestige. They blossom anew. To translate a literary work into another language is to give it added scope, to extend its range, to increase its value, to augment its power in the world. But what about translation in the consulting room? The therapist, after all, deals not with works of art, but with living human beings, their past and present feelings, their behavior, their symptoms. Famously, Freud recounts the paradigm case of Breuer's patient, Anna O., code name for the 21-year-old Bertha Pappenheim, who, after being remarkably healthy, succumbed to a startling range of debilitating physical symptoms, including, while she was nursing her father, paralysis of limbs, anesthesia, distortions of vision, partial aphasia, a nervous cough, and an inability to swallow liquids. Baffled, but noticing her high intelligence and verbal talent, Breuer encourages her to talk to him and tell him stories, a practice she jokingly calls chimney sweeping, and also more famously, the talking cure. For Anna O., this routine of talking, both under hypnosis and not, this reliving through telling, this translation or carrying over from somatic to verbal forms, gradually becomes a means of alleviating her symptoms. Perhaps one of the best known illustrations of this phenomenon, which Freud describes in his Clark lectures, concerns Anna's unarticulated disgust at a small dog belonging to her English governess. One day, this creature, horrid from Anna's point of view, is given water to drink from a glass. And Freud tells us, looking on, Anna felt nauseated by the sight, but although repelled, did not speak for fear of offending the lady. Later, narrating and reliving this scene in her treatment with Breuer, she expresses to him the feeling of revulsion she had originally experienced. And immediately, Freud tells us, she asks for a large glass of water and drinks it down with gusto. Even if today many of us might balk at Freud's somewhat cavalier description and sense that a great deal more complexity is at work here, nevertheless, we do note by this clinical anecdote that translation serves a very different goal in this venue from that of translation in the arts and literature. The aim is hardly to augment what is translated or give it more play, as with translation from one language to another. Here, where what we hope is to extend the range of what's carried over, but here the idea is to free oneself from it, Translation for Anna O serves to open a space in which painful content or behavior can be replaced with more salubrious adaptive thought and action. I bring these musings to you at the start of our day together because as we listen to our presenters, it may strike us that the aims and results of translation vary from one setting to another, and I hope we can ponder these differences as we listen during the day. In today's climate, interdisciplinarity in mental health, what I'm going to say now is an advocacy moment, has increasingly narrowed to include neuroscience, brain research, statistics, and other experimental, theoretical, and quantifying modes of research. However, Erik Erikson, our institutional namesake, and his wife Joan Erikson, a gifted art therapist, were committed devotees of the arts and culture. It is their interests that we privilege in our creativity seminar today, initiated by Dr. Jerry Fromm, former director here, whom we're thrilled to have with us this morning. And the arts have much to teach. And translation, wherever it occurs, is never merely a metaphorical carrying over, but the making of something new from something else, that which was not there before, in other words, a creation. Our speakers will take us into non-verbal realms, but please for a moment indulge my passion for Latin roots. Translation comes from trans, meaning across, and lat from the past participle of ferro, ferre, tuli, latus. Just think, our clinical term transference comes from exactly the same Latin root as translation, transference and translation. We might ponder that. And curiously, during the Middle Ages, moreover, the word translation was used to describe the removal of a saint's relics from one shrine to another. As our speakers share with us today, we might ask ourselves whether we can tell what is being translated or carried over, and what is left behind. What is not or cannot be translated, and why not? Surely the answers are not merely the result of conscious processes of decision-making. And perhaps the Latin etymology can help us see that our notion of translation also connotes something a little darker, like suffering and enduring. To bear, after all, is to strive and to lose, experiences that are core to creative acts in all media. Therefore, I think translation requires a healthy measure of fortitude, as does, of course, therapy. When we try to think about what does and does not get translated, I think we stumble, especially if we sense Pache Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations argument that personal experience is at its core unique and untranslatable, ineffable, if you will. As we know, adolescents are often wholeheartedly committed to this view, famously repeating their mantra, "You don't understand." A brilliant translation scholar, David Bellos from Princeton, argues apropos of this thought that even if pain and other private experiences are fundamentally ineffable, and especially if this is so, surely then every communication of them must itself be seen as a translation. From this perspective, translation becomes a cure for the ineffable. For me, the most poignant example I know of this comes from Kafka's Metamorphosis. When Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a giant insect. Retaining his human sensibility, Gregor, a young man who lives at home with his parents and his sister Greta, and who supports them by working as a traveling salesman, tries to imagine his new unwieldy body with its short, gangly legs and tries to manage it. And he's trying to control it. And he speaks through the locked door of his bedroom to his employer, the company manager, who arrives in a rage at the family's apartment in Prague to find out why Gregor has not shown up for work. Gregor makes a long speech, starting with, "But sir, I'm just opening up in a minute." In the middle of this speech, he heartbreakingly beseeches the manager to, quote, "spare my parents." From the other side of the door, the manager hears something, to which he responds, "That was the voice of an animal." Gregor's words, fully formed in his mind, have morphed into unintelligible sounds as they are being uttered. When I teach this breathtaking work of art, which I do every year, I ask my students to pause. I ask them each to recall privately a moment when they knew what they wanted to say and spoke the words, but the person receiving those words heard something else. Heard something different from what they had said. Heard not what they meant, not what they needed, not what they wished for, hoped, feared, or believed, but something else. In this moment, created unforgettably by Kafka in the form of a human insect imprisoned in his carapace, we find exposed a fundamental aspect of the human condition, and as such, might translation not then serve as a powerful form of redemption? Translation not as a tool of therapy, but as a therapeutic act in and of itself.